Well, welcome to our podcast where we explore how AI is reshaping the way we build work and scale businesses in real life. Today, we are joined by Yann Spottiswood, a co-founder and CRO at Execue, a startup building AI agents designed to take over the most time-consuming part of sales, from finding leads to running outreach, all from the single chat. If I'm making a mistake describing your startup, please correct me. I'm Olga, and here with me, Mila Tuskinen, entrepreneur and founder of Lockin. And this conversation, we're getting into what it actually means to automate sales with AI. Jan, can you tell us a bit about the idea behind your startup? Or you can just start by introducing yourself, whatever is easier for you.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here today. So I have generally a background in sales for about 8, 9 years. So I've worked for companies like Revolut, and also worked on more enterprise level sales at companies like CyberArk. And prior to that, I was actually in the recruitment industry, which is also very sales heavy. And now we're building Execue. So our vision behind Execue is to make it more possible for people to build relationships at scale. So our idea is to use AI to effectively automate a lot of the tasks that can be automated, and that don't need human intervention, to allow people to do what effectively we believe is still hugely important for people to do, which is building relationships. So that's a little bit the vision behind the business.
And what was the moment where you thought like the sales is way more complicated that it needs to be?
I mean, it's so I also spent some time advising businesses on their sort of go-to-market, especially startups. And what you tend to find is in order to have a solid sales process, you have at least 6 or 7 different tools, right? So likely they're using something like Clay to enrich contacts and sort of understand different signals. Maybe they're using an inbound tool like Triggerify as well. And then they need a sequencer and so on, right? So it becomes very complex. It also becomes very heavy in terms of the setup, right? So tools like Clay are not simple to set up, and often salespeople struggle with this. And in order, what we thought is, at least from an initial perspective, is that we need to simplify this process, right? So how can we do this all from one chat interface, which people are now pretty native towards, right? So think about Claude, ChatGPT, all of these big LLMs. Like people understand how to prompt a chatting interface, and this is comfortable for them. So this is where the idea sort of initially started.
But when someone like me, for example, tries execute, what actually happens? Can you describe step by step?
Yeah, absolutely. So as the product currently is, what happens is you get confronted with a chat interface, which will effectively ask you, like, who do you want to reach out to, right? So let's say in this use case, you want to reach out to maybe sales leaders in London, for example, right? So something really, really broad, right? And you say, okay, this is who I want to reach out to. Effectively, this is my ideal customer profile, right? The chat interface will then, so Execute agent will ask you certain questions. So it will try to understand what are the common buying signals within your market, right? So what are some signals that identify that someone might be ready to buy your product? It will ask you to also narrow down the buyer persona, so the person behind who you want to reach out to. And it will ask you to explain sort of your value proposition, right? What are you selling to these people? And that's basically it. That's the setup, right? So once you've answered those questions, then Execute will start its research. This will take some time, so it will do some very deep research to understand out of all of these people, this massive segment of people within a specific geography, which of these people show buying signals, right? So first, who fits within the actual target market that you want to reach out to, and then second, which of these people are showing buying signals. Maybe they've recently joined the company, which signals that they have a budget, right? Maybe the company has recently raised funds, whatever those buying signals may be for your particular business. And it will narrow down the list to effectively the right people to reach out to. It will then enrich all the contacts by itself, and then it will write messaging based on those specific signals. So personalized messaging for every single person, and then it will build the campaign, and you as the person can then review that campaign, edit messaging however you like, and then send it off, and it will start sending the messages.
Yeah, what was my next question? What do you do about personalization? But you already
Mhm.
responded to the question that your AI writes personalized messages, which is nice because no one wants to read robotic messages.
Yeah, and to just jump in there, I think the key thing here from a sales perspective these days is personalization is not enough, right?
Yeah.
And so what we talk about a lot is relevance, right? Is the personalization relevant? Because if you're just saying, this typical thing of, hey, I saw this post on your LinkedIn profile about this conference you're going to, I want to sell you a yacht, right? It's useless. There's no connection between the personalization, and this is something which was developing and maybe would have worked 2 years ago, right? Just random personalization. But the key thing that we focus on is relevance, right? And I think that's the most important thing there.
But what part of the sales like easiest to automate right now, and what is like hardest
Yeah.
to
So I think our belief within the business is that the sales process should never be fully automated, right? So, what is the salesperson job becoming? It's becoming relationships, right? It's human to human connection, right? The building and maintaining of relationships. So, that part is very hard to replicate on a sort of larger scale. And also, the question would be, do we want to replicate that, right? Because at the end of the day, humans thrive off of relationships, and I think that's something we should keep and preserve. However, um, what can be automated? There's a lot of administrative tasks, right? That take a lot of time and do not need to be done for a human being. So, for example, the research element, right? So, the research element takes a lot of time out of a salesperson's week,
Mhm.
which, you know, is difficult to do. It's difficult to find the right research, and it takes probably at least 10 to 15 hours out of someone's week if they're going to do good research. Now, this is something that AI can do, right? And then there's the whole admin piece of like logging stuff and enriching contacts and all of these sorts of things, which can also definitely be taken out of the salesperson's sort of day to day. And then from our perspective, we also believe that the initial outbound piece, right, when done well, because it's important to note that there's a lot of AI, like generic, I mean, what you would call AI slop these days, right, which just sends very generic messaging. That's not something we want to be doing because it kind of devalues the whole sales process. And I don't think it ends up giving a good result. But if done well, the outbound piece, I think, can be automated to an extent because, again, it allows that salesperson to focus more on building relationships and maintaining those, right? So I think those are the key things that can be automated.
Well, talking about generic messages from AI, do you
Mhm.
think that people actually trust AI to run outreach, or they still want to check everything? What's the tendency?
Um, I think it depends on the industry a little bit. So we've been exploring like different industries as well, and I think there are different industries that are more open to it, and others which maybe are adopting this a little bit slower.
Mhm.
But from our perspective, at least when we're running demos, there is when we're initially reaching out to people, there is a bit of a reservation, let's say. Thinking about, okay, yeah, but do I want this AI to be effectively representing us in the market, right? And what kind of allows us to comfort them is two things. The first thing is a lot of our outreach is done obviously through our own product. So we can tell them, well, listen, we wrote this message. And often they're surprised because of how well it sounds. And then when we show them sample messages of what it could look like for them, they can see the sort of quality and the value it can bring. And that's what we try and focus on over volume, right? So we don't try and send thousands and thousands of emails a day, for example. Like it really is about harboring the quality. And when people see this, they tend to find more trust in it.
What companies or what niches have the most reservations about using the AI to run outreach?
So well, talking about first of all, which industries have the least reservation, I think companies that are native in AI, right? So we're talking about sort of more B2B SaaS AI companies themselves. They're quite quick to adopt these things, right? So I think this is definitely an industry that is quite an easy entry for new AI tools. However, given our vision, we've also been looking at like various industries that are more relationship driven, like very relationship heavy. And so we've spoken to, for example, the recruitment industry, real estate industry, these sorts of businesses. And yeah, it is a bit of a slower transition for them, I think.
What's the fastest win the companies see after they start using it?
Mhm.
Do you have a feedback already?
Yeah, of course. So I think one thing that we've tried to do is really have a fast time to value, right? So that someone who's using the product, they can see that value very quickly. And you know, I think the key metric, obviously, that companies look at is they book demos, right? They book meetings, and therefore they're able to advance their business and build relationships and close deals based off the back of like what we're offering them, right? So that's a key thing. But I think the other thing is time, right? So because it's such a simple way to use the product and they don't have to have all of these tools and try and understand how they work. They just need to talk to it. This is also something that a lot of people really enjoy because it saves them time and it increases the simplicity of the process, allowing them to focus on other pieces of the process, right? So let's say the salespeople are doing a lot of cold calling, right? How much more calls can they make
Mhm.
if this is running in the background, right? For example, and they don't have to figure out how to build clay agents on clay or how to do various different things. Like they can just focus on doing the chat and then the campaign runs autonomously. So once they've approved it, like they just need to let it run and they can just watch the replies coming in.
It's a very uncomfortable question, probably for sales representatives,
Uh,
because if your product works, what will
mhm,
happen to them?
mm. Yeah, so I think this is like a really interesting topic to discuss. So I mentioned in the beginning of this that our goal is to help salespeople build relationships, right? So this inherently implies that we are not believing that we should replace salespeople. What we effectively believe is that salespeople will become more for full cycle. So there will be maybe less of a need for very specific salespeople, like now how we break it down between an SDR and then maybe you have an AE, maybe then you have an account manager, and then you have a customer success. Perhaps we believe there's a future where one person can cover multiple of those roles, which we are already seeing, right? So when, for example, Revolut, take that as an example. This is already implemented there, right? So you don't have SDRs in Revolut; they don't exist, but they do hire junior account executives. So it's not like they're killing that flow from kind of graduates into sales. It's just you start as a full cycle from the get-go. And I think that is probably the way we are going because of the amount of output that someone is able to do with AI. Perhaps you don't need to have such specific, let's say, micro roles within the sales process. So I think that's, in my opinion, probably the direction we're headed.
Do you think like entry-level sales roles will not disappear in the next 5 to 6 years?
I hope not. I just think that you will need to have like probably more junior like account executives coming in, right? And I do already see quite a lot of companies doing this where they have like more senior account executives that work on bigger deals, and then they have rather than hiring people as SDRs, they're hiring them as junior account executives that cover the full cycle, right? So they do the outbound part, but then they also take care of the maybe smaller deals coming in as a learning, and then they progress through that.
Last week, we had a guest who built an AI salesperson for demo calls. What do you think? Is it alive? That's this story.
Yeah, it's people will try this for sure, and like no doubt this will this will definitely be implemented in sales processes, and we will see it. Like there's just no stopping that, right? But I know a lot of people, and I probably would consider myself one of those people as well, that kind of our business lives off of relationships, and I keep coming back to this word, right? Because yes, an AI can do a demo, right? So like we will get to a stage where an AI can very quickly do a good demo, and probably we're already getting there. However, um, there is something about a human connection that cannot be replaced, right? There's an old saying in sales that says people buy from people. They don't buy products, right? They buy from people. There's a trust that comes involved in that. And I think I strongly believe that that will be difficult to replace because there is a human connection that cannot really be quantified by what someone's saying, but it's a feeling you get from someone, right? And that's the relationship piece that we're basically betting on. And we want to empower that. We want to empower those people to do that at a bigger scale. So for us, that doesn't just stop at outbound. Like outbound is part of our process, but we're building various different like voice implementations and features that will help people compound relationships because again, that's what we're betting on. I just don't think you can replace human to human connection because people buy from people.
Yeah, definitely we cannot replace humans to build trust, that's for sure. But what parts of sales job then do you think will completely disappear?
I can't see the SDR function being just an SDR function for a very long time anymore. So this is what I think will definitely get replaced quite quickly. But again, I see that becoming more of a full cycle kind of operator role. Obviously, also, I think salespeople will just not be having to do a lot of admin tasks anymore, doing the research on things, like all of these bits will be taken care of. And then like I think that everything around the building of human connections can be automated, right? So let's say, for example, you're going to a conference, right? And you're meeting a lot of people, right? How are you managing these follow-ups? How are you managing to remember all of the people you spoke to? For example, maybe you have a big network of people, and stuff in these people's lives are happening that you should be talking to them about, right? Maybe they're moving jobs. Maybe it's as simple as their birthday. Maybe they've just raised a round, so it's worth getting in touch with them. Like all of this stuff is currently getting missed, and that's something that I feel like AI can really handle as well. So yeah, I mean, I think pretty much everything is at danger of being automated. And when I say at danger, like I don't mean this in a negative way, but pretty much everything is being automated and can be automated aside from that piece of relationship. So I think the salespeople that win are the ones who genuinely can build these connections with other people. And they can build this black book of network that they have that gives them an advantage over everyone else. And if they use AI to do that, they can do this at a much larger scale than they can do now.
Is there any other skill for someone that is in sales today that he should or they should start learning to stay relevant in the times of AI?
Yeah, so I think well, first of all, I think that those that are just purely following kind of the guideline book of sales really need to rethink how they're doing a process, right? So like people who rely heavily on volume, for example, this is something that can so easily get automated, right? So I think those people are probably need to figure out how they're going to change. And then I think that another kind of trait that I would really try and learn is creativity, right? How can you stand out? Because amidst all of this volume that is coming through AI, I think standing out ahead of the crowd and doing things that are kind of unusual can have a really big impact. There was something I read the other day, and I forget the company name, so forgive me on that. But there's this business that in Stockholm, a startup that's basically they identified sort of 10 clients that were the clients they really wanted, right? And they would go to their offices and like drag a massive screen with them, and they created like a video ad specifically for that customer, and they would just stand out of their office and just hold this massive screen and just play it for hours until someone noticed and would like book a meeting with them, right? So they basically refused to leave until they would get a meeting. And this is great.
Impressive.
Like this is, yeah, it's really impressive. This is creative, right? And so I think creativity is going to be a huge trait because again, it's something which you would question like how quickly will AI really be able to be that creative, right? And think that far outside of the box.
Creativity, do you think is a trait that can be learned? I think like a lot of people are already born, either not born being creative.
There's
It's a
also
very hard skill to obtain.
Yeah, also I see that there are so many AI solutions, AI outreach, and people. What I see, companies hire event managers, community managers. They again organize events, marketing events to attract customers, to work, to build a human relationship.
Yeah, exactly. That's really what it's about now, right? Because again, as you said, there's so many outreach tools. There's so much AI doing all of this stuff, and even the ones who aren't using tools are using Claude at the end of the day, right? So like everyone's using it on some level. To your question, Olga, can creativity be learned? I think you're right that there are people who are like inherently just born with a certain level of creativity. That's true, but I do think you can teach yourself to think outside of the box. You can use like stuff. So for example, I can tell you from myself, right? So um, I learned from myself that I never have creative ideas when I'm sitting in front of a laptop, right? So I always used to think, well, I'm just not very creative. So I'm just not going to have these out of the box ideas, right? And then I learned that if I did a brainstorming session at one for an hour or so, or something like this, I would probably not get all of the answers I want. But then what I should do is step away from the laptop and do something that I enjoy doing that effectively activates my brain, right? So that could be going for a run, it could be cooking a meal, or it could be going to the gym or a walk in the park. So these are my four like things that kind of activate my brain. And I realized that all of the ideas that I was getting came in those moments. So I basically, how I figured this out, I did a kind of a test on myself over various months. Whenever I had a good idea or something that I felt was this is a bit different, it's outside the box and it's cool and I want to try it, I would write down where I would have these ideas. And effectively, none of these happened behind the laptop. All of these happened in these four situations. And so I do think you can put yourself in an environment that allows you to be more creative. And of course, then there's levels between people who are just inherently born with it. But yeah, so I do think it is teachable to an extent.
I agree with you. And I've noticed also creative ideas come to you after you meditate, and then you
Yep.
kind of let it go and then switch tasks. And then when you
Yep.
switch tasks, your mind is not occupied with those ideas
Yep.
and just free to create new
Yep.
things.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Jan.
Absolutely.
that is great.
Yeah, Jan. How do you sell your product?
We use Execute first and foremost to run outbound, right? So it would be shocking if we didn't, right? This is sort of the primary way, but we kind of take a three different approaches. So the first one being using Execute to run like our pure outbound sequences, right? Um, and then we of course do like cold calling along with that. The second one is networking, right? So we put ourselves in situations where we can meet people that are relevant to what we're doing, right? So whether that be conferences, whether that be, I mean, this week I'm going to sort of like a hackathon event, like it's all of these sorts of stuff where we put ourselves in front of people and we can again build these relationships with people that are relevant to us. So we use our network in that sense. And then the other one is one that you mentioned, which I think is completely imperative to any sort of AI business at the moment, which is community and events, right? So we want to preach this idea of building relationships. So how do we now create communities and events where we can tie all of this together, right? So admittedly, we're very early in this at the moment because we're still a very young business, but looking at stuff like run clubs, dinner clubs, other events, like any place where we can bring like-minded people together, this will be a core part of our strategy in order to grow as a business as well.
And you mentioned earlier that there are a lot of AI sales tools, and that's true. And what do you think most of them are getting wrong and your platform is getting right?
There is a lot of there's a lot of AI slop out there, right? So I don't know if you've heard of this term before, but it's basically refers to like very generic AI kind of messaging, right? So there's a lot of that out there. I think this is the key thing that a lot of people get wrong, is that it's just enough to just spray a bunch of volume out there to to get some results back, right? So I think this is something key. And then I think there are quite a few tools that maybe forget that salespeople are not always the most technically, let's say, advanced people when it comes to, they like using tools, but like they don't understand how to configure them a lot of the time, right? And there are a subset of people who work specifically in AI where that's different, but as a whole, like as a population, this is not something they're generally used to doing. So I think those tools block themselves to a wider audience because of that. Um, and then, I think that often a lot of sales tools can become quite transactional. So they're sort of built for the purpose of just booking demos, right? And whilst this can work, it does rely a lot on a lot of different scenarios. And I don't think it's also a sustainable way of building a commercial business, right? So the people that use it may get some short-term results, but like how does that sustain over when you need to grow into maybe enterprise level deals, when you need to scale those operations, that no longer becomes viable, right? So again, it comes back to one thing for me is that it shouldn't just be about getting responses and sort of sending out a lot of volume and getting a few responses back, because you burn your market really quickly, right? So within a matter of months, you've gone through maybe your entire target market and maybe you've got a few replies back. So you have to be really careful about the quality that's coming through there. And I think a lot of these tools aren't considering that. So it's not scalable in that way. And then a lot of people forget about, okay, indeed, I think a lot of people are trying, or a lot of tools maybe are trying to kind of really replace the sales function. Whereas I think the goal here should be to enhance it rather than replace it. So I think these are the common mistakes.
Got it. Thank you for such an interesting and eloquent response. Talking about the future, what do you think like a normal sales team will look like in 5 years?
I think you will have a lot of full cycle salespeople. It's what I said before. I think you will have a lot of full cycle sales teams where the roles are no longer split between SDR and account exec and account manager. I think you will have a lot of sales teams where everyone's kind of doing that job with the help of a lot of tools. I also think, and this is maybe a bit of like a controversial bet, but I think travel will actually increase. And I think salespeople will be meeting people in person a lot more. Because again, it's like, how do you stand out from AI? Well, I'm going to go meet people and be a human being, right? So that's something I want to kind of focus on. And I hope we take the industry in that direction as well. So I think this could be something we see a lot more, call them like field sales, right? They go to conferences, they go and meet people in person, they shake hands with people, they build those relationships. Maybe they're focusing on the high level deals because maybe the AI can really take care of the smaller deals. This is something that could happen. Yeah, that's kind of how I see it going.
What is the one opinion that you have about AI, like about sales or AI in general, that most people disagree with?
That's a really good question. I think that a lot of people in my network, or at least that I see on LinkedIn, reject the idea that the SDR function, and I know this is a very controversial topic, but reject the idea that the SDR function will no longer exist in a certain amount of years. I wouldn't say that most people disagree with it because I think it's quite contentious. I think there's sort of a certain population that disagrees, a certain that does. But I also think there's a lot of misunderstanding about it because I think when I say that or someone else says that, the implication immediately from other people is that I'm saying that people are going to disappear, which as sort of the conversation we had today, I don't believe that. Yeah, so I would say that's the one I get the most kind of pushback on.
There's something that I myself might disagree with you. Unfortunately, I want to agree with you, but the future doesn't look that bright to me, considering that the energy lockdowns and then 15-minute cities that are being created as we speak. So I don't know if that will be in fact the truth that salespeople will meet their potential customers in person. This is what we had before internet, actually, before AI. I mean, it was wonderful. We had so many personal connections. And
I think I understand your perspective, and I do think like not just in sales, but I think with AI in general, like there's two ways this can go, right? It can
Yeah.
either go incredibly well or incredibly poorly, and it depends a lot on how we as a human race kind of manage this whole situation of where we are effectively bringing what could be considered a new species into our life, right? I mean, when we look at it on a bigger level. So I do agree that there are two ways it can go.
Mm.
The way I'm trying to look at it is like, okay, it's here now. So if enough people try and maneuver this and manage it into something good, then so many great things can come out of it, right? So looking away at sales, for example, like healthcare, right? Like there's so many amazing possibilities in healthcare. There are so many amazing possibilities in sales as well, but it's about what we do with it. And that's, I think, what we're trying to do at Execue um, is to try and foster that positive side of it, right? To enable salespeople to really be able to do the things that, as you say, go back to what sales has been for since the start of the human race, right? When we were trading like spices, like it's people who are dealing with people, and like that's what we want to keep as a core. And then allowing AI to enable people to do that more, right? This would be a great outcome, right? So I can say from myself, how many more people can I go meet because I don't need to spend my time writing up pricing proposals, or I don't need to spend my time doing all of this research.
Yeah.
That means I can go out and meet so many more people, right? And so that's great. So I see that positive light, but yeah, it can go two ways. I definitely agree with that.
I hope it goes your way. It will be
Me
better
too.
for
Me
everyone.
too. Yeah, for sure.
Jan, thank you so much for your thoughts and experience. Yeah, just maybe you have questions, Jan, to us.
No, not at the moment. Not at the moment. It was a pleasure to speak about this. It's a very interesting topic.
Always sales is important topic, and
Yeah,
there are like so many noise on internet, on LinkedIn, so you never know. That's why we would like to speak with people who are involved in sales,
yeah,
and especially you have background in B2B sales, and yeah, that's really important to clarify the situation.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for having me, guys.
Thank you, Jan.